Stories have the power to unite people by emphasizing shared experiences and values. By telling stories, communities can strengthen bonds, promote understanding, and foster a sense of solidarity among their people. A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for joining us. It is not one of the original communities that sprung up after emancipation. Ashton Hall has an interesting history. We begin by placing that history squarely in perspective. Exactly what do you recall of Ashton Hall?
What I can tell you is that Ashton Halls was once a plantation, an estate. And about 100 years ago, between about 1915 and 1935, it was sold and became a residential community. So the majority of people who settled there came from the upper part of St. Peter, Boscobel area.
What I learned from my grandparents and what came down, my great-grandparents moved into Town Bend, presumably from Boscobel area. And this is part of my maternal grandparents, and they invited others as well to come into the area, so I learned.
Indian Ground area, French Village, Diamond Corner. Some came from St. Lucie, some from St. Andrew, but the vast majority came from the upper part of St. Peter, and that's where my folk came from. It was a time of great mobility. You know, in the 1880s, you had, I understand from Dr. Welch, 70,000 Barbadians went to Suriname. 70,000. And then you had thousands in the next 2 decades go to Panama for the building of the Panama Canal. And at that time, just about that time, we had World War I, around 1915. And Ashton was sold, and these people came and bought the land. There were people who had relatives overseas. People used to go to Cuba and Curacao and wherever else. And I suspect that that is some of the money. But some of those people were savers. They lived on the land. I believe it was a trust system to a credit system where they paid for the land. Because not many people would have had cash at the time, but land would not have been that expensive back then. Not like today. I mean, you might have to pay $250,000 to get a small piece of land somewhere in the area. But the place is zone 1, water zone, so not a whole lot of building can go on. So people who have land there cannot build on it. So it hasn't grown like other communities. If it were not for the zone 1 issue, you have a whole lot more homes there. So it switched from agriculture to residential community. You still have a little small farming. And of course, back in that time, you didn't have public transportation. So people had to walk everywhere. And well, Ashton was, and you'll hear me call it Ashton, commonly referred to as Ashton. Ashton was convenient to Speightstown, which was the capital of the north. And it was walking distance. Speightstown to the west, the Whim to the south, mile and a quarter Whitehall to the east, Maynards to the north. The whole of Maynards was under sugarcane production. Well, not only sugarcane, I mean, but it was under agricultural use. And I remember in the 1960s, it was sold to a Mr. Edwards, and I think he was from Christchurch. And he even dug up some of the grasslands and planted cane right down to the edge of the gully. Yeah, so where homes are now, yeah, almost into the gully he dug up. Maynards was sold in the late 70s, sometime in the 70s, the northern part of it. And so prior to, up to about the mid-70s, Maynards was under production. So it was very convenient, and there was no public transportation by land. So people traveled from Speightstown to Bridgetown by schooner. So they would load at the dock at the time by Manning, Wilkinson, and Challoner. Um, there was another one. And then go up somewhere to Bridgetown on a schooner with their goods and so on. But generally, they had to walk. I remember my grandmother telling us, she used to tell us stories. I was a little boy then, but I remember she had come from the upper part of St. Peter to Gay's Castle area, and she told us about walking from up there, Gay's Castle, which is close to Boscobel, and walking from up there to Bridgetown. So 2 o'clock in the morning, she and some other ladies from up there would set off with their produce on their heads and walk from there to Bridgetown to sell their produce. And she said one morning they set off. When they got down by Mount Pleasant area, Pleasant Hall, she realized she had left something home. She told the others, go ahead. And these are the days when you didn't have a whole lot of residences along the road. I mean, you had cane fields everywhere. And she turned back, went back to the Gay's Castle to get what she had forgotten, while the others went on. And then she walked by herself. And they set up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And she walked by herself, and they walked to Bridgetown. And they used to do it. So life was, a bit tough. That is why so many people moved to Ashton in a hurry, because it was so convenient then, to transportation, to whatever you needed. Yeah. Back then you didn't have public transportation. I mean, the auto industry was commercialized just close to 1900, 1896. The Americans started to commercialize the auto industry. So by the time Ashton was sold, 1915, 1920, you didn't have vehicles, you didn't have public transportation. And if you didn't catch a schooner, you walked. And they walked. It's so life was tough, and people were determined to make a living. And people back then generally had large families. I mean, these are things we don't think of right now. I mean, it wasn't the kind of development that we take for granted. And so it was a hardship, and there were some people who, weathered the storm. I remember as a boy, sometimes on weekends, I would go to Spikestown maybe 3 times on Saturday. Morning, I would ride my father's bicycle, ride to Spikestown twice for groceries, and then in the evening, go back for fish. Sometimes on Sunday mornings, I'll go again, ride again out to Six Man's Half Moon Fort into St. Lucie for fish. So, yeah, sometimes I'll walk down Maynard's Road and across Six Man's to get fish. So people found it convenient to be there. You had, in later years, you had the CP school, Gorgon Parish School. That was a merger of the Coleridge, which was the top of Farm Road in St. Peter, and the Parry, which was in St. Lucie, close to St. Lucie Parish Church. They became CP in Ashton Hall. You had the police station at the entrance to that gap. It was not only a police station, but a court, magistrate's court. And I don't know if I can call it a morgue, but what's his name now? The parish doctor, the one I remember most is Dr. Gilmore. He would do postmortems right there at the station.
A discussion on Ashton Hall community is incomplete without making mention of that establishment where many a life has been saved, many have recuperated, and where many entered this world. Having a hospital in a rural community can bring about numerous benefits, positively impacting the health, well-being, and overall development of that community.
By the 60s, we had the St. Joseph Hospital, which you see evidence of it there still, but you know the story. My mother worked there. But then you have a whole compound that was a large property. They suspect that it was the main residence for the plantation. But by the time I came along, the owner was some Dauphin, a Frenchman, and then it was sold. The Catholics built a church. They had a convent there, an actual convent. I don't think they had more than 2 or 3 on the island, but there was a convent there. And church, convent, hospital. The compound is still there, but not heavily used. I left here to go overseas in 1983, and it was still operational. I don't know what happened since, but by the time I came back, it was no longer functional.
On February the 9th, 1995, the late Michelle Hinkson was a member of a touring party of the hospital. She filed the following report.
The tour of the St. Joseph Hospital shows deciding to close it is based on simple mathematics. With dysfunctional equipment, a roof that leaks practically everywhere, and water bills that have run into $20,000 a month, government refuses to continue spending $5 million annually to cater to an average of 8 patients. Those patients are all housed in one section of the facility in an apparent cosmetic attempt to cut cost. Why cosmetic? Health Minister Liz Thompson says more than $9 million was spent refurbishing the St. Joseph Hospital. Yet there's no indication as to where the money went. She says this is why a commission of inquiry has been set up.
Well, that is what the commission of inquiry, which we will set up, we hope will be able to tell us, because the hospital was purchased for $6 million. $9 million was spent on refurbishing it, or allegedly spent by the last administration. Yet the roof at the hospital has not been repaired. Only the foyer has been repaired and the grounds maintained. The Villa Marie Convent was not touched at all. No repairs have taken place there or refurbishing. The hospital is not fully equipped.
In fact, everything at St. Joseph Hospital is a question of dollars and cents. This is what our CBC crew saw when we toured. Water stains on the ceilings, some of which have collapsed, old-fashioned equipment, artifacts left by the sisters destroyed by workmen. In the kitchen, nothing works except the oven and the stove, while in the boiler room, the equipment is costly to run because it uses diesel. 2 pieces of equipment out of 4 are not working, and the steam escapes from the old pipes, reducing the amount of energy generated. The standby generator finally has an automatic switch, but leaks pans of oil and is inefficient because it doesn't have enough ventilation. One big shock on the grounds is the gallons of water flowing from the faulty holding tank. Why is this happening? Because the ball valve that would seal the tank when it's full is missing. So unless someone is around to monitor the situation, water flows in one end and gushes out the other. When we were on site, neither the engineer nor his assistant were on hand, and we were told by the ground staff this site would have continued until last evening. The water at the St. Joseph Hospital wasn't always metered, but with this change, the leaking tank and as yet other undiscovered leaks in the plumbing, which has never been repaired, sent the water bill to $20,000 last February. The lowest bill at the St. Joseph Hospital, according to the records of the financial controller, is $5,000. This month's bill is $9,364, since another leak has been found. On the good side of the water situation, one of the groundsmen, Mr. Watson, showed us a well on site, which he says can supply the entire 21-acre property. According to him, the sewage treatment plant can also purify all the hospital's wastewater so that after it comes out of a tank in a nearby gully, it's pure enough for drinking. And just what else are our taxes paying for? Take the new fitness center. It can accommodate 15 people, and its construction cost is over $294,000. Signs of work were evident when we toured, and construction goes on despite the fact no one will ever use it. CBC also understands half the equipment is already in the island and is stored nearby. So why not stop construction, you may ask? Well, it would take more legal fees to break the contract than finish the job. The Drug Rehabilitation Centre, housed in the former Villa Marie Convent, isn't making a profit either. According to the release from the Ministry of Health, in 2.5 years, the centre has treated 258 patients, and there are no new ones coming in at present. And what about the ambulance we saw in the accident and emergency? Not with patients, but laundry from the St. Michael Geriatric Hospital. This is how the remaining machines at the laundry are now used, even though one washer and one steam press are both out of order. How much money it will earn, we don't know, but at least we did find some activity over in the theatre. Staff were busy scrubbing for 8 surgeries today. There are also 2 hip replacement surgeries scheduled for Friday. There are 2 operating rooms at St. Joseph, and at least one was refurbished. Government has now retained a consultant to tell them how much it would take to make St. Joseph fully operational. This is no doubt costing money as well. And we already know equipping St. Joseph will run into millions, since 16 million was spent in the last 5 years. The grounds are the most positive aspect of the hospital, and those responsible for the labour of love want to see them remain this way, but officials could give them no reassurances.
Realistically, it wouldn't make sense to keep the grounds quote-unquote open if the hospital is going to be closed, but the amount of money that has been spent on this, and considering that there are fruit, vegetables and flowers to a degree, perhaps we could look at instituting what we would call a mothballing team to ensure that the fruit trees, etc., are maintained. But certainly it would not be maintained to the capacity as it is now.
Furthermore, such a team would also take care of the general premises, because we wouldn't want the premises to run into dire disrepair.
How soon will a solution be found? And what state will these acres be in at that time? We can only wait and see. Michelle Hinkson, CBC News.
I remember even at the St. Joseph Hospital, when a lot had closed down, there was this old lady, I believe she was from the UK, that lived in one of the houses. And my mom would go there for plants. I remember going with her. And I remember that lady, in exchanging plants or giving my mom plants, she used to preserve fruit. So she would preserve cherries. And that was, I think, maybe one of my first introductions to cherries. And she would preserve them, and she would come out and she would give us. And I had learned that from then, you know. So there are different things that we saw in the community. And then right outside the hospital, you had some of the boys that would play, I guess we call it worry, an old African game.
In the hospital compound, the same St. Joseph Hospital compound, there's also a well, I remember from the 60s, but there may be more than one now. But it supplied water to the reservoir, which is across the street at the entrance to Reservoir Road. There's a reservoir there. And so that water came from the compound. And because that whole thing had a wall around it, the whole compound, and it was a massive compound. It had a wall around it. So, a large pipe came from that compound down the bank, because it's a high bank, under the road, up the bank to the reservoir across. And then through that same reservoir road, there's a pumping station. And then later on in the 90s, I think, for whatever reason, there was an emergency where they ran another main, huge main, 18-inch main, I think it is, from the same hospital compound across the land where we used to play, through Tom Bend, where I grew up, across Mainers to Allendale. There's another reservoir over there, maybe a pumping station too. But this supplied water, this in the hospital compound, supplied water to both places. The reservoir in Ashton and the one in Allendale, St. Lucie.
The St. Joseph Hospital was a major source of employment and, in many ways, it enlivened the community.
And my earliest memories of St. Joseph Hospital were what we call then the Nuns' Yard Fairs. So there were the fairs, the community fairs that were sponsored by, I believe, the Catholic Church and the nuns. And what was really, really good about that we looked forward to, well, I looked forward to at the time, were the lucky dips that they would have and the gifts that they would have in the lucky dips. And I think to this day, it's probably the best, they were probably the best fairs that one could have ever had and experienced as a kid. And not only that, but the hospital itself, the grounds were always immaculate. There was such tranquility when you would go to St. Joseph Hospital. And I remember my grandmother used to work in the laundry room before she had emigrated. And in the afternoon, I would go with like my youngest aunts and sometimes my uncle to take her lunch. So I'd get to go or go up to, and you would see all these sheets and the different stuff that they were cleaning for the hospital. There was a gentleman, I think he was called Saucy, and I believe he was a security guard. And he's probably the only person I can remember offhand who worked there. And he would sit at the entrance to the hospital itself, just out there. And he also lived in the community. He lived in Grace Road. And in addition to that, there was a tennis court. And I remember going with my aunts, well, one of my aunts, she played tennis, Orvin, and it was Pastor Boyce, who we called Giant. They would be playing tennis, and I was probably maybe 2 years old, and they would be playing tennis, 4 years old, playing tennis. And because there was a court actually east of the Catholic Church, just outside the church itself, and it probably is still there, or probably in disrepair, but they played tennis. So you had all these different things going on there. And again, the fruit trees. As we got older, you know, the guys from the Gap and even the surrounding areas and my cousins, we would go onto the premises and we would pick the fruit. So you had lots of citrus fruit, oranges. You even had fat ports in there as well. And I remember some of the nuns, and some of them, what I thought was, at that time as a kid, a novelty, because when you see nuns on TV, there were a whole bunch of white nuns, but we had black nuns. You know, I think one was called Sister Francis, if my memory serves me correct. But that in itself was a novelty. And there weren't a whole lot of people from the community, honestly. The Catholic Church was there that were Catholic. I don't recall. I remember from Millionaire, you had the Richards/Whitneys who would go to the Catholic Church. Yeah, and then you had Cicely Skeet at some point. She attended there, and then you had Carlotta Scantlebury, Dr. Rock's mom. She also attended the Catholic Church, but there weren't a whole lot of people from the community. Like I said, the majority of them had belonged to the Anglican Church, and they attended the Anglican Church. One of the things I remember for my 11th birthday, we wanted some ice for the party, and my cousin and I, we went to St. Joseph Hospital to try to get some ice. And my cousin, I guess being cheeky, we got in the elevator and went all the way to, I guess this was the ward where they kept those who had mental challenges. And we got to the floor and we heard this lady coming towards the elevator, I'm sorry, and saying something that was completely off the wall, and we're scared and we're pressing the elevator, just trying to get out. And eventually what we did, we basically got out of there and just came through. The other thing is, going there, my mom also worked for a time at the St. Joseph Hospital. And she took care of this lady, I remember. This lady came from Trinidad, white Trinidadian, and they even had invited her. They wanted her when they were going back to move there and stuff like that. But yeah, St. Joseph Hospital was a fixture within the community. It was an institution that actually also added to the character of Ashton Hall.
Yes, that would have been in the early 90s. I was very young at the time, and I worked for an allergist called Dr. Alban Liverpool, and he had a lovely office in the St. Joseph Hospital complex. And it was a lovely experience. I was very young, and Dr. Liverpool gave me a chance. You know, most of the children, he was an allergist, so most of the people, the patients were young children. So I had the responsibility of calming those little children down, because from the time they see an injection needle, they're screaming and all of that. So along with being his receptionist, I was also like the mother. Because they were very small children, you had to be very careful with them. You had to speak in a certain voice that just calmed them down, because as soon as I said before, they see that injection needle. Dr. Liverpool was good at it too, with calming them down, but it was my responsibility. From the time they come in, I made sure that they were very comfortable, they were seated, sometimes giving them a little snack, a sweet or something, just to ease the nerves, and then we get on with the business. Going into St. Joseph Hospital, it was a really lovely experience, very quiet, very calm, very serene, and I was always impressed with how very clean the property was. It was really well maintained, and I really enjoyed working there, to be quite truthful. I think I was there for close to 2 years before I moved on to something else, but it was a wonderful experience, I would say. I remember Miss Bab. She used to be the receptionist, and I think, beautiful lady. I think she came from St. Peter. I remember her because she was so helpful, and she was a really beautiful lady. I also remember there was a lady in the kitchen who was responsible for putting the meals together. The staff meals and the meals for the patients. Her name was Miss Cummins. I would never forget Miss Cummins. If you did not have money to pay for your lunch, no problem. Miss Cummins would make sure. And the meals were always so delicious and always well balanced. You could go to that cafeteria, you were met with a smile. What are you having today? And you had a menu, different things to choose. It was lovely. I remember those meals because I enjoyed them so much. They were really, really nice. Mr. Archer was a lovely man who would meet me at the gate, and he would always greet me, good morning, Laurie. He had the responsibility of cleaning and maintenance, I would say, and the place was always immaculate. I was always impressed with how well he maintained the property, trimming the hedges, doing the painting. Very short man, but very pleasant. You know, very easy to get along with. Believe it or not, when I was at the St. Joseph Hospital, I met a doctor, a young girl. I think she was there to do training, and her name was Dr. Louise Berry. I would never forget. And we developed a relationship for a long period of time. She invited me to the beach. I would invite her to my home. And I think someone said that she then left the hospital and was attached to the QEH. I'm not sure about that. But yes, I can remember Dr. Louise Berry, very lovely lady, very young at the time in training, but we developed a relationship, a friendship. And I was very impressed with how very clean the place was. Like I said, I remember they had this big Pride of India tree to the front of the building. It should be still there. Beautiful tree. You go in and it was so quiet and so peaceful. You hear the birds in that tree. That started my day. That started my day, how peaceful and quiet it was. I found that the sisters who ran the hospital, even though it was a business, that you could approach them anytime, you could ask them any question. They always had something cheerful to say. They answered any questions that you had. It was really a pleasure to meet a lot. I don't remember the names, but I know that from the time you see them and you ask them anything, any concerns you had, they were always able to help you. And if they were not able to help you, they would have directed you in the right direction that someone could answer any queries you had.
There is a lesson in that for all of us. In fact, it reinforces the importance of being eager to serve people and doing it with pride, an act that lies in the transformative impact one can have on the lives of others, reinforcing a sense of community, goodwill, and contributing positively to the well-being of individuals and society. This has been My Community Ashton Hall in St. Peter. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. The series continues next week at the same time.